We all know the statistic, 50% of Americans are divorced. But most people don't want to get a divorce. And so if there's another option that's going to fit your needs in order to continue to go forward with that marriage, it's worth it. Welcome back to the No Judgement podcast here. I am your host, Wil Halaz. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about alternative options to divorce. A lot of times, people will come in and talk to me and say, I've noticed a really big change in my partner. Things just aren't the same they used to be, but I still love them and I don't really want to get a divorce. What are my options? What can I do? And, it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Whenever we think of family law, the primary cases that we think of are divorce cases, custody cases. We don't think about some of the alternatives. So today we're going to talk about some of those alternatives and a situation that actually came up with a famous celebrity. So here we go. Recently, there was an article that I saw come out that talked about Bruce Willis's wife had considered divorcing the actor before his dementia diagnosis. And in the article, she goes through and talks about how she felt like something was just off, that there was something different with Bruce, and she wasn't really sure what to do. And so she was, talking to people in her life, and that's an important thing to do. When you feel like something's going wrong, talk to trusted individuals. But the more that, she kind of noticed these changes, the more things seemed to kind of go downhill, and she was concerned about what was going on. Now, fortunately, ultimately, they were able to get the appropriate diagnosis and find out that these shifts were related to medical conditions. First was a diagnosis of aphasia, and then ultimately the diagnosis of dementia. So in this case, though, she was contemplating divorce because she just didn't know where to go. She didn't know what to do. And this is where speaking with a family law attorney can be helpful. A lot of times, I feel like people are afraid that if they go and talk to a family law attorney, that the only advice that they're going to get is, you need to file for divorce. Okay. And in my opinion, that is not my role as an attorney. And that is not an attorney's role. It is not to tell you, what you need to do, but to help guide you through the options that you have available to you. So that is one of the things, that is what I would like to talk about today. So there's a couple different things that you can do outside of divorce if you feel like your marriage is not going the direction that you want it to go, or if you see these sort of shifts in behavior with your partner, but you're not desiring to get divorced. You still want to remain connected with this person. The first option is something called a legal separation. That's what we call it here in Missouri, where I practice. It may have a different name in other jurisdictions, but a legal separation is very similar to a divorce in that we divide up assets, we provide for maintenance or alimony, spousal support. We'll provide custody agreements, child support, but the marriage is not dissolved. And so there's some important distinctions there between dissolving your marriage versus getting a legal separation. The biggest one is that, as I said, your marriage is not dissolved. So you remain married to the person, but for legal purposes, for purposes of acquiring assets, for incurring debt or accruing debt, you no longer have the sort of, I'll say, liability, for lack of a better term, that you would have if you were married. A lot of times when I'm discussing this with people, it has to do with either a strong religious belief against divorce, or as kind of the topic of this podcast would indicate, where you don't want to get a divorce, but you notice something is wrong. There's something off, and it may be a medical condition, like with Bruce Willis. It may be drug or alcohol addiction. It may be just, some concerns about excessive gambling, excessive debt being accrued, things like that, where you've got some concerns. You need some legal protections in terms of making sure that you are not going to be liable for these types of debts, or if there is just, again, if the relationship is not going the direction that you might want it to go, and you want to maybe protect any assets that you're going to continue to accrue in case things do go south, but you're not looking for a divorce just yet. So legal separation is an option that is out there. With a legal separation, ultimately, that can stay as a legal separation. You could sort of revert back to a full, what I would call a full-blown marriage, or sort of get rid of the terms of the legal separation, or you could ultimately convert it into a dissolution of the marriage if that is the route that it ends up needing to go in the future. But you're giving yourself those options. You're giving yourself that opportunity to continue to be married, but for legal purposes, you are separated from your spouse. Another option in the case of something like Bruce Willis's situation is if there is a significant mental health concern, you may not need to go down the route of a divorce or a legal separation at all, but you may want to look into something like an adult guardianship, particularly if we're looking at, older couples. This is something that would, affect that demographic significantly more than maybe a younger demographic, where if there are concerns about the other party's cognitive abilities and a decline there, and there's concerns about, again, something like spending on things that they wouldn't normally spend things on, and if there's a link to a mental health concern or a cognitive ability concern, then you may want to pursue a guardianship. And that will allow you to have, more control about the finances, so more control over those things that maybe your spouse is not able to control themselves. Again, this is an option where if you are concerned, you have these sort of concerns or these issues are arising in your relationship, but you don't want to get a divorce. You love this person, you want to stay married to this person, but there are situations that are coming up where some legal protections need to be had. If that comes up, a guardianship might be the route for you. It might be the route for you and your spouse to most effectively protect and prevent those sort of negative consequences that we're wanting to try to avoid. So, this is just two of the options. There's all sorts of ways that, we can figure out how to protect somebody's interest when these situations arise. And there's situations that nobody hopes or plans for getting involved in. Nobody is going into a marriage or relationship with the sort of expectation that, at some point my partner's cognitive abilities are going to decline and I'm going to have to take control of our finances or our assets or things like that. But these mechanisms are available through the legal system in order to make sure that, those significant negative consequences can be avoided. Another option is a postnuptial agreement. With a postnuptial agreement, it's just like a prenuptial agreement, but what you're doing is you are basically saying, look, we're having some struggles. We're in a fairly good place right now, but we're having some struggles, and we want to make sure that we're taking care of these sort of things now rather than if we get into that sort of heated litigation in a divorce case or even possibly in a legal separation case down the road. That's another thing, another tool that you can utilize to try to address those issues without having to go through a full-blown divorce. Again, a lot of people, it's obviously divorces are much more common these days than even, say 20, 30, 40 years ago. There's not the taboo that there used to be about somebody getting divorced. We all know the statistic, 50% of Americans are divorced. But it is still something that, most people don't want to get a divorce. They're not seeking to get a divorce. And so if there's another option that's going to fit your needs, that's going to, sort of meet what you need in order to continue to go forward with that marriage, then it's worth it to go and speak with an attorney about those options. And those are the sort of things that, at Cordell Cordell, these are the sort of things that we deal with on a regular basis. I will say that these are not common things, mostly because I think most people are not aware that these are options. So that's something that we wanted to bring up today. We wanted to talk to you about in this podcast, is that these alternatives, these are things that, as a firm that only practices family law, these are the types of things that, we are familiar with, that we have experience in, and that if you need help with this sort of situation, give us a call. We will be here to help you out with that. And, as I tell my clients all the time, it's not my job. Like I said at the beginning, it's not my job to tell you need to get a divorce. My job is to help provide you with those options that you have available to you, and then we can figure out what best fits your situation. So if you're involved in this type of situation, you need to talk to somebody who's familiar with these options, somebody who knows what you can and can't do, and maybe can come up with some creative ways to address the needs that you have. So if you're in need, if you have questions, give us a call. We're happy to answer those questions through a consultation or ultimately through representation if that's what you need. So until next time, no judgment here.